my fellow Americans. It is with a heavy heart that I come to you with news that, just moments ago, the People's Republic of China carried out a series of brutal surprise attacks against forces of the U.S., Taiwan, Japan, and the Philippines across the span of the Western Pacific. These attacks were carried out on the order of China's President, Liu Hao, and his illegal quest to seize both the democratically governed island of Taiwan and to uproot and destroy the freedoms, security, and rule of law that have kept our world in relative peace for nearly a century. This unprovoked attack is the culmination of decades of escalation on the part of both China and Russia against the free countries of the world. And though we have always strived to avoid war, war has now been thrust upon us. I must caution you that the news in the coming hours and days will be dark and heartbreaking. With reports still coming in from across the region, and with communication, verification, and details remaining difficult to fully attain, what I can tell you at this moment is that there have been U.S. losses of soldiers and sailors, ships, and aircraft. How many, I do not yet know, but we must all prepare ourselves that the losses will be in numbers we have not experienced since another infamous day in history on a December morning in 1941.
Immediately following the simultaneous drone and cyber attacks carried out across the Indo-Pacific, China initiated the second phase of its assault, the launch of a colossal wave of missiles aimed at hundreds of targets throughout the region. Of the estimated 6,000 missiles in the PLA inventory in August of 2032, nearly 40% would be fired in the first hours of the opening day of the war. The scope, scale, and selection of targets were the result, following much debate within the PLA prior to the war. While some advocated limiting the strike strictly to Taiwan itself, others believed that only a broad-scale attack against forces of the US, Japan, Philippines, and Australia, including targets as far away as Hawaii and Alaska, would guarantee victory. General Li Busheng, commander of the PLA's Eastern Theater Command and the man in charge of the Taiwan operation, chose a middle ground solution, that beyond Taiwan itself, his most valued precision missile strikes would be focused strictly on US military assets, reaching as far out as the second island chain, including those in Japan, the Philippines, and US territories, including Guam. General Li understood that he was threading a dangerous needle, that with American forces embedded in civilian and joint use facilities across the region, collateral damages were inevitable. He gambled that limiting strikes to American targets alone would keep Japan and the Philippines from fully entering the fight. At precisely 23:01 local time, the opening salvo was launched. At a mobile early warning radar site on Okinawa, one that had thwarted a local drone attack, radar operator US Army Specialist Tom Nadratowski of the 38th Air Defense Artillery Brigade watched in awe as his monitor suddenly filled with deadly contacts. He described it as, quote, an approaching typhoon of fire. Fewer than 5 minutes later, the first wave of nearly 1,000 missiles struck targets across Taiwan. As air raid sirens wailed, civilians in high-rise apartments in Taipei watched with dread as scores of surface-to-air missiles rocketed into the night sky to intercept the coming onslaught. Off the coast, Taiwanese warships immediately joined the fray, while a sudden and desperate fight to the death raged in the skies overhead. Operating at an ISR site on the Taiwanese island of Penghu, U.S. Green Beret advisor, Sergeant First Class H.P. Leffler, summarized the velocity of the fight, writing, "For days, there were PLA and ROC ships and aircraft operating within sight of each other, ready to shoot if the order came. Once that first missile flew, everyone, everywhere, all at once, pulled their triggers. It was instant and total chaos. From an observation post hidden within the Alishan mountain range overlooking the Taiwan Strait, Second Lieutenant Sun Han Chen of the 8th Army Corps, 75th Signals Group, watched it all unfold as the wave of destruction approached. One by one, he later wrote, I saw ships and aircraft vanish like dying stars. Then came the sheet-like rain of meteorites, first hitting the coast, then sweeping inland. It looked like an alien invasion. 50 missiles targeted the Chiayi Air Base, destroying aircraft, fuel, weapons, air defense and command control systems, and cratering its lone runway, a template of attack duplicated at all civilian and military airfields across the island. Though several ROC fighter aircraft were untouched within their mountain bunkers, they were of little use without taxiways or runways in the opening hours of the war. Meanwhile, caught in a tunnel connecting the military and leadership command centers beneath a mountain in suburban Taipei, Taiwan President Ying Chen felt the floor shake beneath his feet as PLA missiles worked to burrow their way in. Though both command centers survived the day damaged but operable, communications with the outside world would prove from painfully slow to non-existent. One aide recalled the chilling responses given to the president and his staff when asked of the status of the 4th Tactical Fighter Wing, of the 8th Army Corps, of Naval Fleet Command, or contact with the Air Operations Center. Those responses were all the same. We don't yet know. 10 minutes into the launch of the attack, missiles reached targets in the Philippines and Japan. At Marine Corps Air Station Futenma, U.S. Marine Corps Sergeant Morgan Griffith of the 31st Marine Expeditionary Unit had just landed from a flight from Guam when the base came under the initial drone attack. As he and his unit disembarked to the sound of sirens wailing, they were suddenly ordered to run. He later described the moment as air defense missiles roared into the sky. Quote, "We were still sprinting across the apron when the first missiles hit. All I remember was being lifted into the air, then everything went dark." Of the 13 Marines in his squad, only Griffith and one other would later make it to the bunker without serious injury. Across Japan, scores of vulnerable aircraft on the ground were set alight, runways cratered, and air defense and command and control facilities damaged or ruined. While at the Yokosuka Naval Base, the Arleigh Burke-class destroyer, the William P. Lawrence, docked for resupply, was struck by 2 hypersonic missiles. In a brilliant flash witnessed by thousands across Tokyo Bay, the ship and its skeleton crew of 14 sailors and 23 civilians were obliterated, with the ship's remains scattering as far as Agatsuma Island, over a half-mile away. In the Philippines, PLA missiles struck numerous U.S. Army, air and naval facilities from Luzon to Mindanao. Though airfields were temporarily damaged, and aircraft including a dozen fighter, tanker and cargo aircraft were destroyed, China's attempt to locate and destroy the US's much-feared and potent ground-launched anti-ship and surface missile batteries, including newly deployed hypersonics, proved elusive, with not a single unit damaged or destroyed. Equally worrisome for Beijing was news that a missile strike on the Basa Air Base near Manila had killed 3 high-ranking Philippine officers, including the vice commander of the Philippine Air Force, the consequence of which would be felt hours later when the President of the Philippines, Rafael Manalo, announced his nation's entry into the fight on the side of Taiwan, its friends and allies. At 15 minutes into the launch of the attack, missiles began reaching targets in Palau, Tinian, and at the US's fortress in the Pacific, Guam. In all, more than 300 long-range precision missiles were sent to cripple or destroy America's critical logistical hub on Guam. an island deemed essential for US forces to sustain a fight against China in the Western Pacific. Tracked by space, naval and ground assets as far away as Alaska, the incoming missiles were soon met by defenses, both kinetic and electromagnetic. Northwest of Guam, crew members aboard the civilian container ship the GLT Taurus looked up in fascination as US interceptors met their targets beyond Earth's atmosphere. One crew member wrote in his journal, quote, "Though we knew they were terrifying portents of war, the ethereal explosions were beautiful to watch." Thinned but unbroken, the wave of incoming missiles soon pitched over into their terminal dive. More US missiles were in the air to greet them, all within an unseen cloud of electronic jamming. At Task Force Talon within Andersen Air Force Base, Lieutenant Commander Patrick Baker was confident that his forces could blunt the worst of the attack. That though the PLA drones had inflicted damage, they had failed to eliminate the island's critical ballistic missile defense radar. Yet Baker was also realistic that there would be leakers, missiles that broke their way through the layers of defenses. With many of the defense systems yet untested to scale in battle, the only question was how many leakers there would be. As the skies overhead provided a brief titanic thunder and a light show, 23 of the original 300 incoming missiles struck home. Andersen Air Force Base received the vast majority. 9 aircraft on the ground, including a B-2 bomber under maintenance, were destroyed. A number that could have been far worse if not for the recent construction of hardened aircraft shelters. But with much of the fuel storage facilities in flames, its twin runways cratered, its air defense systems damaged or depleted, it would be some time before Andersen Air Force Base would once again be fully operational. In one of the more extraordinary moments in the attack, at Naval Base Guam, the USS Cheyenne, an aging Los Angeles-class attack submarine, was damaged in port by a nearby missile strike. Sonar technician Chief Petty Officer Mark Tomlinson, who sustained minor injuries in the attack, said later, "We were all pissed as it felt like cheating hitting us docked like that. We couldn't wait to get her repaired and back out into the fight." Despite the damage inflicted on the island and relatively low casualties, Lieutenant Commander Baker was satisfied with the outcome under what he called the ultimate stress test. He later told a reporter, "China threw everything they had at us, and we're still here." He added, "They won't get another bite at that apple." If that was the good news, the bad news, the very worst news, was taking place approximately 350 nautical miles to the northwest of Guam. Aboard the USS George Washington, Rear Admiral Richard Ward, commander of U.S. Navy Carrier Strike Group 5, was in the fight of his life. On an escort mission for elements of the U.S. Marines 31st MEU from Guam to Sasebo, Japan, the GW's Combat Direction Center suddenly came alive with alerts as satellites detected missile launches across eastern China. The volume of the launch told Ward all he needed to know. While the ships went to general quarters and crews donned their stifling anti-flash gear, Ward gave the order to open fire on the PLA aircraft and surface vessels shadowing his strike group, all in an effort to degrade their ability to track his carrier in real time. With data acquired from a constellation of satellites and analyzed by AI, Ward could see the threat laid out before him. Of 3 volleys of incoming intermediate-range ballistic missiles, the much-feared DF-26B carrier killers. Of the 400 in the PLA's inventory, 100 were allocated for the opening day salvo for any US carrier in range, all to increase the odds of destroying it. High above the East China Sea, the first interceptors fired from a ballistic missile defense system on Okinawa destroyed a small number of the incoming missiles before a separate strike leveled the facility itself. Soon, interceptors from Ward's strike group were also in the air, with the group's fate in the hands of the 2 Flight 3 Arleigh Burke-class destroyers capable of tracking, targeting, and destroying ballistic threats. Prior to their final terminal dive, roughly half of the incoming missiles were destroyed, with 30% failing all on their own during launch and re-entry. From aboard the nearby amphibious transport dock ship, the USS San Diego, U.S. Navy officer of the deck Lieutenant Commander Stephen Ehlers looked out with growing dread as the nearby destroyers first launched their long-range interceptors, then their slower, medium-ranged missiles. It meant that the danger was now just seconds away. Outside, sounds of outgoing missiles and the tearing sound of close-in weapon system fire rippled out over the water. Then, disaster. As Ehlers later described it, quote, "The first two missiles missed and hit the water, throwing a geyser so high I couldn't see the carrier. But then, the whole world lit up like day." Of the 100 total missiles fired at the carrier strike group, there were only 8 leakers, but they were enough. First hit was the Arleigh Burke destroyer, the USS Ted Stevens. Then, immediately after, the USS Jack H. Lucas. Both ships were catastrophically damaged and would sink within minutes, taking scores of US sailors with them. Seconds later, 4 of the carrier killer missiles struck the George Washington, punching through the flight deck, incinerating crew, aircraft, fuel, and munitions, turning sections of the mighty ship into instant funeral pyres. Over the next 12 hours, a desperate but futile effort was made to save the ship. While crews battled the spreading flames and engineers attempted to slow the flooding, aerial tankers from the Philippines and Japan hastened to sustain the George Washington's few airborne aircraft en route to safe air bases. But with further internal explosions tearing the ship apart, by midday the order was given to evacuate the ship. Sailors were offloaded as quickly as possible, but with sudden threats of submarine contacts and reports of cruise missiles in the air, the remaining ships of the strike group were ordered away to safer waters. Overhead, a P-8 Poseidon of the Royal Australian Air Force monitored those sailors forced into life rafts, while 3 Japanese civilian cargo ships made best speed to pick up survivors. A blunt statement from Washington, D.C. was relayed to Beijing that if the rescue efforts were molested in any way, the U.S. would consider, quote, a strategic-level response. By evening, as the last of the known survivors from Carrier Strike Group 5 were rescued, the USS George Washington, consumed by the fires raging within, finally slipped below the waves for its 3-mile plunge to the ocean floor. Across the Western Pacific, the PLA would suffer heavy losses of its own, with more than 31 aircraft shot down and a confirmed 18 warships sunk. As one Pentagon analyst put it, China lost approximately 10% of their most advanced destroyers on the opening day, but we also just lost 10% of our carrier force. It would be weeks to know how many US military personnel were injured, killed, or lost at sea. The official US tally would later be 2,632 killed on the opening day of the war, the majority originating from those lost in Carrier Strike Group 5, including Rear Admiral Richard Ward, who was last seen going back into a passageway to save others.
We must all prepare ourselves that the losses will be in numbers we have not experienced since another infamous day in history on a December morning in 1941. But make no mistake, America is prepared to meet this immoral aggression head on. We will win this war, and we will win the future peace, security, and rule of law that ensures both our American freedom and those of the free people of the world. God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America.
Coming up in episode 21, as the air battles rage, the invasion fleet advances on Taiwan. If you enjoy this series, please send me a YouTube thanks, or join the Flat Circle History Patreon site, where you'll get behind-the-scenes access, commercial-free episodes, and tons of member-only content. Plus, it will help out John, the guy who makes this series possible. You can also now purchase Flat Circle History merchandise at John's website at forsberg.com. Lastly, a shout out to my subject matter experts for this episode, including Michael Hilliard of the Red Line podcast, Darth Rust, Fix Edit, and The War at Home, and a few others who shall remain anonymous. And as always, please like, subscribe, and share this video. And thanks for watching.